You're controlled by fear. Every decision, fear whispers what you cannot do. Every opportunity, fear screams why you'll fail. Every risk, fear paralyzes you into safe mediocrity. Meanwhile, ruthless winners feel the same fear but act anyway because they understand something you don't. Courage isn't absence of fear, it's weaponizing fear as fuel. They're not fearless. They're fear mastery experts who've learned to move despite terror, act despite paralysis, succeed despite every instinct screaming retreat. Today, you learn ruthless fear psychology that makes courage automatic, transforming the fear that controls you into power that propels you. Understanding fear mastery is about developing psychological tools for action despite terror, not eliminating fear. This isn't about becoming reckless or ignoring legitimate dangers. This is about distinguishing paralyzing irrational fear from rational risk assessment, then acting decisively despite discomfort. Fear exists to protect you from genuine threats, but modern fear responses trigger for career risks, social rejection, and growth opportunities that aren't life-threatening. Learning to act despite these false alarms is how ordinary people achieve extraordinary results, while fearful people watch from safety. I am Niccolo Machiavelli. In The Prince, I wrote extensively about fortune favoring the bold, not because bold people lack fear, but because they act despite it. I observed that timid princes who let fear dictate decisions lost everything to bolder opponents, who felt identical fear but acted anyway. The difference wasn't fear absence, it was action despite fear. Modern psychology confirms what I observed. Courage is learned skill, not innate trait. Fear response is universal. Action despite fear is trained capacity, separating winners from those paralyzed by identical feelings. Research on exposure therapy proves that repeated confrontation with feared situations reduces fear response over time. Worst-case scenario planning research shows that explicitly imagining catastrophic outcomes reduces anxiety and enables action. Studies on regret show that people regret inaction far more than action that failed. Your fear is managing you because you haven't learned to manage it. Today you learn ruthless fear mastery. Now, I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I refuse to be psychologically dominated by others. 1. The fear. Reframe. Terror into energy. The first principle is reframing fear from enemy preventing action to energy source fueling performance. Fear creates physiological arousal, elevated heart rate, adrenaline, heightened focus. These are identical to excitement physiological signatures. The difference is interpretation. Label arousal as fear, and you feel paralyzed. Label identical arousal as excitement or readiness, and you feel energized. Ruthless reframe transforms terror into rocket fuel. Think about fear you experience before high-stakes situations. Your body activates, heart racing, breathing shallow, muscles tense. You interpret this as, "I'm afraid I can't do this." This interpretation creates paralysis. Identical physical state reinterpreted. My body is preparing me for peak performance. I'm ready. Same physiology, opposite outcome. The sensations don't change. Your story about them does. Here's the reframe practice. When fear sensations arise, consciously relabel them. This isn't fear paralyzing me. This is my body energizing me for challenge ahead. This adrenaline isn't weakness. It's performance enhancement. Speak this reframe aloud if necessary. Your nervous system responds to your interpretation more than to objective reality. Change interpretation, change response. When you interpret arousal as fear, you're triggering threat response that recommends retreat. When you reinterpret identical arousal as excitement or readiness, you're triggering challenge response that recommends engagement. Same physical state, completely different behavioral output based purely on your label. This reframe is psychological leverage transforming paralysis into power. The research is clear. Athletes who reframe pre-competition anxiety as excitement perform better than those who try suppressing anxiety or those who interpret it as debilitating fear. Your fear sensations aren't problem. Your interpretation of them as paralysis-inducing is. Reframe ruthlessly. Fear feelings become power signals. Most people try eliminating fear feelings, failing repeatedly because fear is hardwired survival response. Strategic people reframe fear into excitement or readiness, leveraging same nervous system activation for performance instead of paralysis. Your fear doesn't disappear. It becomes fuel. I want you to drop this. Fear feelings are power. I reframe ruthlessly. 2. Exposure therapy. Building fear immunity. The second principle is systematic exposure therapy, deliberately and repeatedly exposing yourself to feared situations in progressively intense doses to build immunity. Fear is extinguished through exposure, not avoidance. Every time you avoid feared situation, fear grows stronger. Every time you expose yourself despite fear, fear weakens. Ruthless exposure builds courage through fear immunity that makes previously terrifying situations routine. Think about fears controlling your decisions, public speaking terror keeping you silent, social rejection fear preventing authentic connection, failure fear stopping you from pursuing goals. Each fear maintains power through avoidance. Exposure therapy means deliberately doing exactly what you fear repeatedly, until nervous system learns there's no actual danger and fear response extinguishes. Here's exposure implementation. Identify specific fear limiting you. Create exposure hierarchy from least to most terrifying versions of feared situation. Start with lowest intensity exposure, uncomfortable but tolerable. Repeat until fear response diminishes significantly. Progress to next intensity level. Continue until you can face highest intensity with manageable fear. Systematic desensitization through progressive exposure builds complete immunity. When you avoid feared situations, you're reinforcing fear's control and missing every opportunity requiring courage. When you expose systematically, you're extinguishing fear response while building capability in previously avoided domains. Short-term discomfort, permanent fear elimination. This trade is how fearful people become courageous through deliberate exposure training. The mechanism. Your nervous system learns through experience. Avoid danger. Nervous system concludes danger is real and increases fear response for protection. Face feared situation repeatedly without catastrophe. Nervous system concludes danger assessment was wrong and reduces fear response. Exposure retrains your threat detection, eliminating false alarms. Most people avoid feared situations, protecting short-term comfort while ensuring permanent fear control. Strategic people expose systematically enduring short-term discomfort to achieve permanent fear immunity. Your courage is built through exposure you've been avoiding. I want you to drop this. I expose systematically. Immunity builds through repetition. 3. Worst-case scenario. Planning, eliminating paralysis. The third principle is explicit worst-case scenario planning, deliberately imagining most catastrophic possible outcome in detail, then planning how you'd handle it. Fear paralyzes through vague catastrophic possibilities that feel unbearable. Explicit worst-case planning reveals that even catastrophic outcomes are survivable with preparation, eliminating paralysis through concrete recovery plans. Think about decisions fear paralyzes. Starting business, what if you fail catastrophically? Ending toxic relationship, what if you end up alone? Pursuing ambitious goal, what if you're humiliated publicly? These vague, catastrophic fears create paralysis. Worst-case planning means explicitly imagine the absolute worst outcome, then plan concrete steps for handling it. Once you have survival plan for worst case, fear loses paralytic power. Here's worst-case planning. For decision, fear is blocking. Write explicit worst-case scenario in detail. Business fails completely, lose all investment, have to get job. Relationship ends, face period alone, eventually rebuild social connections. Goal attempt fails publicly, face temporary embarrassment, learn from failure and try differently. For each worst case, create concrete recovery plan. How exactly would you survive and rebuild? Once you have specific plan, worst case becomes manageable challenge, not existential threat. When fear operates through vague, catastrophic possibilities, imagination creates unbearable scenarios preventing action. When you plan explicitly for worst case, you're reducing catastrophic unknown to concrete, manageable challenge with recovery plan. This eliminates paralysis because you've proven to yourself that even worst case is survivable. Your fear loses power through concrete planning. The counterintuitive truth: imagining worst case explicitly reduces anxiety more than avoiding thinking about it. Avoidance lets imagination create infinite catastrophic scenarios. Explicit planning limits catastrophe to specific scenario with concrete recovery plan. Bounded known catastrophe is less paralyzing than vague infinite possibilities. Most people avoid imagining worst case, believing it increases anxiety. Strategic people plan worst case explicitly, discovering that catastrophe is survivable, eliminating paralysis while maintaining action despite fear. Your paralysis ends when you plan explicitly for what you're vaguely dreading. I want you to drop this. Worst case is survivable. Planning eliminates paralysis. 4. Fear action. Separation. Movement despite terror. The fourth principle is fear action separation, understanding that feeling fear and taking action are independent processes that can occur simultaneously. You don't need to eliminate fear before acting. You can feel completely terrified while still moving forward. Courage is action despite terror, not absence of fear. Master acting while afraid, and fear loses all power to control you. Think about how you've treated fear and action relationship. Do you wait for fear to subside before acting? Do you believe you need confidence before attempting? This belief that action requires fear, absence guarantees paralysis, because significant actions always generate fear. Fear-action separation means feel the terror fully while simultaneously taking the action anyway. They're parallel processes, not sequential. Here's separation practice. When fear arises about necessary action, acknowledge it explicitly. I'm terrified right now. Then take the action anyway while fear is still present. Don't wait for fear to diminish. Don't try eliminating fear first. Feel fear completely while simultaneously moving forward physically. Your legs can shake with terror while they walk toward what you fear. Separation is experiencing fear and action simultaneously. When you wait for fear to subside before acting, you're giving fear control over your behavior and missing all opportunities requiring courage. When you act despite fear's presence, you're demonstrating that fear is information, not command. You can note terror and still move forward. This separation eliminates fear's power because you've proven you can act regardless of how you feel. The key insight: fear is feeling, not behavior. Feelings don't control actions unless you let them. You can feel terrified, feeling, while acting courageously, behavior, simultaneously. These are independent systems. Fear tries convincing you that terror means stop. This is lie. Terror means you're attempting something significant while being aware of risks. Act anyway. Most people believe courage requires confidence or fear absence. Strategic people understand courage is acting despite feeling terrified. Your action despite fear is what builds actual confidence, not the reverse. Move while afraid, and fear loses control permanently. I want you to drop this. Fear and action are separate. I move despite terror. 5. Regret avoidance, overpowering fear avoidance. The fifth principle is using regret avoidance to overpower fear avoidance, recognizing that long-term regret for inaction is far more painful than short-term fear of action. Your brain defaults to avoiding immediate fear even at cost of permanent regret. Deliberately weighing future regret against present fear reveals that fear avoidance is catastrophically expensive long-term. Regret avoidance motivation overpowers fear paralysis. Think about major regrets in your life. What do you regret most? Things you tried that failed, or things you never attempted because fear stopped you? Research shows overwhelmingly that people regret inaction far more than failed action. That career you didn't pursue, that relationship you didn't initiate, that dream you abandoned. These inaction regrets are permanent while fear of action would have been temporary. Here's regret leverage. Before allowing fear to stop you, explicitly imagine yourself at 80 years old looking back. Which scenario creates more regret? Attempting and potentially failing, or never trying because fear paralyzed you? Vivid future regret visualization typically reveals that attempting despite fear creates far less long-term pain than permanent regret of fear-controlled inaction. Use future regret as motivation stronger than present fear. When you optimize for short-term fear avoidance, you're guaranteeing long-term regret accumulation, looking back at life full of what-ifs and if only I had. When you optimize for regret avoidance, you're accepting short-term fear as necessary cost of regret-free life. This time, preference shift, valuing future self over present comfort, enables courage through regret avoidance motivation. The mechanism: immediate fear feels more intense than distant future regret. But regret compounds over time, growing into permanent life dissatisfaction, while fear would have lasted minutes or hours. You're choosing temporary fear avoidance at cost of permanent regret accumulation. Reverse this. Choose temporary fear acceptance to avoid permanent regret. Most people optimize for immediate fear avoidance, creating lives full of regret. Strategic people optimize for regret avoidance, accepting temporary fear as price of regret-free life. Your courage comes from valuing future self's peace over present self's comfort. I want you to drop this. Regret overpowers fear. Future self matters more. 6. Fear acknowledgment, removing power. The sixth principle is explicit fear acknowledgement, openly naming and acknowledging your fear rather than denying or suppressing it. Suppressed fear grows stronger, operating unconsciously. Acknowledged fear loses power through conscious recognition that reduces its unconscious influence. Ruthless acknowledgment, I'm terrified and I'm doing it anyway, removes fear's hidden control while enabling action despite terror. Think about your relationship with fear. Do you deny it, trying to appear brave? Do you suppress it, believing acknowledgement equals weakness? This denial gives fear unconscious power, controlling you without awareness. Acknowledgement brings fear into consciousness, where you can evaluate it rationally and choose action despite its presence. I'm afraid isn't weakness, it's truth that enables conscious choice. Here's acknowledgement practice. When fear arises, state it explicitly aloud or written. I'm terrified of public speaking, rejection, failure, judgment. Full acknowledgement without minimizing or denying. Then add, and I'm taking action anyway because my goals matter more than my comfort. This formula, acknowledge fear fully, then declare action despite it, removes fear's unconscious power while enabling conscious courage. When you deny or suppress fear, it operates unconsciously, controlling decisions without your awareness. When you acknowledge fear explicitly, you're bringing it into consciousness, where rational evaluation reveals it's often disproportionate to actual risk. Acknowledgement doesn't eliminate fear. It removes its unconscious control, allowing conscious choice to overrule fear response. The paradox: openly acknowledging fear reduces its power more than denying it. Denial requires constant psychological energy, maintaining false bravery facade. Acknowledgement frees that energy for actual action. "I'm afraid and doing it anyway" is stronger position than "I'm not afraid," lie that fear knows is false, increasing anxiety. Most people deny fear, believing acknowledgement equals surrender to it. Strategic people acknowledge fear explicitly, understanding that conscious recognition removes unconscious control. Your strength comes through honest acknowledgement plus action, despite fear, not through denial pretending you're fearless. I want you to drop this. I acknowledge fear explicitly. Action follows regardless. 7. Courage muscle building through micro-bravery. The seventh principle is building courage muscle through micro-bravery, daily small acts of courage that progressively build capacity for larger, brave actions. Courage isn't innate trait, but trained capacity, strengthened through use like physical muscle. Daily micro-brave acts, uncomfortable conversations, small risks, minor confrontations, build courage capacity, making major brave actions accessible. Your courage muscle builds through progressive training. Think about courage as muscle requiring training. You wouldn't attempt deadlifting maximum weight without progressive training building strength gradually. Courage works identically. Attempting maximum courage action without building capacity through smaller brave acts typically results in overwhelm and retreat. Micro-bravery is progressive courage training building capacity systematically. Here's micro-bravery practice. Daily, take one action that makes you uncomfortable despite not being dangerous. Speak up in meeting despite social anxiety. Have difficult conversation you've avoided. Try activity outside comfort zone. Make request risking rejection. Each micro-brave act is courage training session building capacity. Consistency matters more than intensity. Daily small brave acts build more courage than occasional large attempts. When you avoid all discomfort maintaining permanent comfort zone, courage muscle atrophies, making even small brave acts feel impossible. When you practice micro-bravery daily, courage muscle strengthens, making progressively larger brave acts accessible. This systematic training is how naturally fearful people become genuinely courageous through deliberate practice. The progression. Start with minimally uncomfortable actions. Build consistency. Gradually increase difficulty as capacity grows. Eventually, actions that felt impossibly terrifying become routine because courage muscle has strengthened through systematic training. This isn't talent, it's disciplined training building capability systematically. Most people wait for major courage opportunity, then fail through lack of training. Strategic people build courage systematically through daily micro-bravery until major opportunities become manageable through developed capacity. Your courage is muscle requiring daily training to strengthen. I want you to drop this. Micro-bravery daily, courage muscle builds systematically. You are no longer someone controlled by fear. You're not someone who interprets fear arousal as paralysis signal. You're not someone who avoids feared situations, ensuring permanent fear control. You're not someone paralyzed by vague, catastrophic possibilities without concrete plans. You're not someone who waits for fear to subside before acting. You're not someone choosing temporary fear avoidance at cost of permanent regret. You're not someone denying fear, giving it unconscious control. You're not someone who never builds courage capacity through practice. You are someone whose courage is automatic through fear mastery, who reframes fear arousal as excitement and readiness energizing performance, who exposes systematically building immunity through repeated confrontation, who plans worst case explicitly eliminating paralysis through concrete recovery strategies, who separates fear from action, moving forward despite terror, who leverages regret avoidance to overpower fear, avoidance choosing temporary discomfort over permanent regret, who acknowledges fear explicitly removing unconscious power, who builds courage muscle through daily micro-bravery training capacity systematically. Your fear exists but doesn't control you because you've mastered weaponizing it as fuel rather than accepting it as brake. You understand courage isn't fearlessness, it's action despite terror, movement despite paralysis, success despite every survival instinct screaming retreat. Fear is your servant providing energy and focus, not your master controlling decisions. Drop this affirmation in the comments right now. Fear fuels me. Courage is automatic. I am strategically ruthless with fear. Subscribe because we're teaching psychological mastery, transforming weaknesses into weapons. Like if you're ready to stop being controlled by fear and start leveraging it ruthlessly. Share with someone whose fear is stealing their life. Fear controlled you completely. Today you learned ruthless fear mastery, making courage automatic through psychological weapons, transforming terror into unstoppable power.